was a promotion. Assistant Special Agent in charge of counterterrorism and national security. He'd be in charge of a team of about 350 agents. And best of all, it was in New York.
New York was the flagship office of the FBI. It's where it happens in New York. I mean, that's where you wanted to be if you were an FBI agent. So it's only natural that John Oneil, who was, you know, his whole life was the FBI from what I could see, would want to be in New York.
In the New York office, they were still piecing together the evidence in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. They'd also had new information that bin Laden had been involved in the shooting down of 2 American Black Hawk helicopters in Somalia. The confession of captured al-Qaeda member Jamal Ahmed al-Fadl told of Osama bin Laden's efforts to develop chemical weapons, buy weapons-grade uranium, and to spread the al-Qaeda network into Europe. Oneil was working to connect all these dots with a powerful U.S. attorney, Mary Jo White.
I had a reputation of being fairly autonomous also and not being afraid to rattle cages to get things done, and he had that reputation too. And so when he came to New York, he wanted to try to get us both off on the right foot and, you know, not have those 2 cage rattlers, work at counter purposes.
U.S. Attorney White was among the first of his allies in Manhattan. His forays into the night added more. He connected with many of them at the epicenter of the New York scene, Elaine's.
He's a lovely man, intelligent, easy to talk to, very well groomed. Wasn't a braggart. He was a low-key. Because I know some of the others, they tell you they just saved the whole world out there. But he never spoke like that.
Elaine's has a very hierarchical seating structure, and sort of the tourists and the peasants are relegated to the back end of the restaurant, and you simply don't want to be there. And there are about 7 or 8 tables on the front. John always made sure that he was in one of those front tables because he understood the importance of being completely wired, and he felt in order to be wired he needed to be in the front of the restaurant, not the back of the restaurant.
He's like George Plimpton. I mean, he's George Plimpton of the job. There's no place that George can't sit. And so it was with John. He could sit any place he wanted. He was the big kahuna.
Oneil would return to the office, often after midnight. He might have a scrap of information or a new name.
John always feared that somehow we would miss something. He would be after his investigators to make sure they covered every base, and woe be you if you failed to cover everything.
Oneil's investigators now had more evidence about one of the conspirators in that Bojinka plot of Ramzi Youssef. Wali Khan Amin Shah admitted involvement in a plot to assassinate President Clinton. The plot had links to bin Laden.
Under John's investigative leadership, he pressed his investigators to try to look for the ties, look for any connectivity between these organizations. This larger picture turned out to be Al-Qaeda.
Oneil was becoming obsessed, haunted by the specter of bin Laden.
My dad had a lot of video of Osama bin Laden. Whatever was out there was actually in his apartment. He studied him several times, watched the videos I know several times.
He would watch videotapes, he would read whatever material he could get his hands on. We had a fax in the house. People would fax him information all the time. John would sit in bed or sit on the couch or wherever and constantly underline everything.
By then, bin Laden was in Afghanistan, and I organized through some channels to do an interview with him, which took shape in the early '98 through spring of '98. The interview actually happened in May of '98 with John Miller.
And some of Oneil's information helped Isham and correspondent John Miller draw up their questions.
I wanted to ask, did he either, Mr. Bin Laden, either finance or order the World Trade Center bombing because of the Ramsey-Youssef Association? So because of the association is why I would want to ask that. But would you ask him now if we could ask that before he starts again?
Oneil couldn't wait to get his hands on the tape.
We wanted to see everything. Well, I need to see the whole thing. I need to see the whole interview.
He says he doesn't know. No, so what is it?
I said, well, you know, we have this whole thing about outtakes, and you know, it may sound stupid, but we really can't give you all the outtakes of the interview. He says, no, you don't understand. I have to see the whole interview. And it was like he wasn't taking no for an answer.
Oneil finally saw the entire interview on the ABC News website.
He was obsessed by him. I think there's no question about it. He always knew that there was so much more that he didn't know. And that's what spooked him. What spooked him and what really used to drive him crazy was what he didn't know and how much was out there that he didn't know.
Two bombs minutes apart exploded without warning Friday outside the U.S. embassies in Nairobi, Kenya, and Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
We had turned on the TV watching CNN, and John Oneil put it together in relatively short order and was convinced in his own mind that Al-Qaeda was behind that.
I had the same immediate reaction. What I did was to call both Lou Scalero and the Attorney General. I think John Oneil and I, in particular, having been enmeshed in Bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, was our immediate reaction.
And it was really the first time ever that I began to at least focus in on really the significance of Osama bin Laden.
2 American embassies had been bombed in East Africa virtually simultaneously.
That clearly was the event that changed bin Laden's profile dramatically because it was such a major event. 2 embassies blown up simultaneously over 500 miles apart in the continent of Africa was not expected. Most of the attacks previous to that were in the Middle East. This was in a part of the world we didn't expect. 2 embassies done simultaneously showed a great deal of sophistication in the organization. So this was a major event.
But at headquarters, the brass were engaged in a procedural dispute.
We're in the command center, and people are being pulled in. I'm over there. There's all sorts of senior bureau people there. Everybody's coming together. And the reason that this becomes a significant question almost immediately is because the FBI's got to deploy people overseas. They're going to deploy people initially to Kenya and Tanzania. And who's going to be the on-scene commander?
Oneil believed his experience and expertise made him the obvious choice to lead the investigation as the on-scene commander.
And he really wanted to roll up his sleeves and get into it and wanted to be there and wanted responsibility. He believed the New York field office had the greatest depth of expertise of anybody in the country on this issue. And if it's Al-Qaeda, how could you send anybody else but the people who know the most?
But down in the SIOC, there were those who wanted to cut New York and Oneil out.
FBI.
On the QT, Townsend called Oneil.
And he was, to say angry, disappointed, hurt, there becomes this bureaucratic arm wrestle over who's going to be the Office of Origin.
Oneil desperately needed the help of U.S. Attorney Mary Jo White.
U.S. Attorney's Office.
He and I were both very adamant that the New York field agents who were most knowledgeable about bin Laden and the Al-Qaeda organization get over to Africa as quickly as possible as the investigation was unfolding, because those first few days are often the most critical to whether you capture somebody or not, or figure out who's involved. And he and I certainly shared the view that you need the folks who know what they're looking at, in charge of or very much in the thick of the investigations.